Thank you. At the conclusion of this session, we've got to start working on our problem statements, our goals, our recommendations, and we've got to start looking at things in our buckets, what we need to do now, what we need to have the chief do in 12 months, what we need to have him do in 18 months, and what's outside the police department's purview. We've got to start honing in on those things. So once we get through with the presentations today, we've got to all start thinking about those things. So as you're listening to things today, start making notes and anticipating those questions, because we've got to start helping Sharon put that down. She may be the scribe, but we're all the sources of her information. So we can't leave this to be her responsibility. We all have to make those recommendations, and we have to come to some consensus as to what is going to go into this piece of paper. So Sharon, if you have anything else to add.
The only thing is we have a few logistical things. You've received the agenda. We are going to have to make some adjustments, a couple of things. I know the MNPS speakers have to leave early, so we'll have them first up. Captain Levitt said that was okay. And also Dia, who will be filling in for David, will have to leave for about an hour and come back. And so I think she'll be back in time to give David's data report. So those are the only things we're going to have to switch up.
Great.
And also we have an additional speaker, Ken Stark from MNPS. And we would ask each speaker to make sure you sort of give your background as you make your statement, because that's not on the agenda, what you actually do and why you're called to speak. So that's it.
Sharon, since you created the agenda and you know who the speakers are, would you please call upon the speakers today?
Okay. You ready to start?
Let's go.
Okay. The first speakers, we're dealing with one of our major buckets, policing in the Metro Nashville public school system. We have Ashford Hughes, Dr. Michelle Springer, and Ken Stark are our speakers, and I will ask them to go in whatever order they would like to. We're actually looking at how the Metro Nashville Police Department interfaces with the schools, how they handle violent situations. They're going to touch on the SROs, any experience they have, and I'll ask Ashford to take it from there.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Judge Blackburn, for having us on the call today. I'll introduce myself and then our team, and then we can kind of give an overview of what's been taking place as far as past history with the SROs and what we see moving forward. But my name is Ashford Hughes. I serve within the district as the Executive Officer for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I will kick it off to my colleague to introduce herself, Dr. Michelle Springer.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Springer, and I have the honor and pleasure of serving as the Chief of Student Support Services within Metro Nashville Public Schools. Thank you for having us.
And now I will kick it to our other colleague, Mr. Ken Stark, who is our Executive Officer for Operations.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Stark. As Ashford said, I'm the Executive Officer for Operations for MNPS. Under my purview are transportation, nutrition services, IT, data quality, central services, boundary planning, and most appropriate to this conversation, our safety and security department.
So I'll ask the two chairs of this subcommittee, do you want us just to jump into kind of the history or the understanding of what's taking place with our relationship building with MNPD and the SROs?
Yes, that would be a good starting point.
Ken, if you don't mind kind of starting us off, you have that history and that's under your purview, just giving a global concept of what goes on with that relationship and where we are and where we look to be moving forward.
Sure. So I guess just to kind of give everybody a a brief overview. There's a memorandum of understanding between the district and the police department that governs the SRO program, and it really is set up to be kind of a partnership between the two entities. We have there are two MNPD SROs in all of our zoned high schools. There's a couple of the alternative high schools where there's just one. And then at the middle schools, we have a single SRO at each of the middle schools. So we view the SRO program as kind of one component of our overall kind of culture, building culture and student discipline kind of, I guess, program for lack of a better word. So it really does kind of operate like a partnership. There's a relationship that's developed between the principals and the school staff and the SROs on site and the sergeants that oversee them, and the working together in how they handle the various incidents that come up in schools, on a daily basis, and work through that. And they're a part of our process and a part of our team. Kind of the general kind of division of work, if you would, is the police officers, the SROs, are kind of have, and I know Captain Levitt's on here, and I'm sure he'll clean up if I mess it up later. But they primarily are doing two things. They're doing a relationship and a education component with the GREAT program, and they're working to build relationships with students. And they also have obviously their law enforcement component, and the district staff has more of what you would probably consider the traditional school rules kind of thing, dress code violations, those kind of school things that wouldn't necessarily rise to a criminal kind of thing. And so the two kind of work together as those issues come up through the day. Just the other thing, to give you kind of a little bit broader picture, the district also has its own internal safety and security force. We've got about, depending on whether we have all our vacancies filled or not, we have 31 positions for officers. That's to cover the entire district, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think 4 of those folks are dedicated to the overnight shift, and the rest are kind of sprinkled through the week. At our highest staffing point, which is between the hours of 10 and 2 every day, we have, if everybody is at work, nobody's off sick, all our vacancies are filled, we have 15 people. So that's roughly one officer for every 10 schools. So we obviously don't have the wherewithal to be everywhere all the time. So having the SRO presence in the high schools and middle schools is certainly a benefit from that standpoint. And it also, I personally believe that it helps when we do have an incident that requires police response of more than the SRO can handle, or more than the building staff can handle. It does speed the response. In schools where we don't have an officer present, then we have to follow the same procedure everybody else. You call 911 and they send somebody from the local precinct. We know they put us at the top of their response list, but just the fact that they've got to come some distance to get to us does slow the response. So we're very appreciative that they're there in our buildings and helping from that effort. So I kind of threw a lot out there, kind of tried to give you a pretty overarching perspective. I'm happy to answer questions or fill in if need be. But
let me ask if Dr. Springer would just follow up with you, Ken. Dr. Springer, if you can just kind of give, from your perspective, leading the students around the social emotional learning component, and in your role as a former principal in partnership and working with our SROs in that process. Maybe that'll be helpful for the committee to hear as well.
Absolutely. So within student services, our team really focuses on supports to student, staff, and families. And we have a broad scope of work to include like attendance, community partnerships, et cetera, all the way to discipline. And so, I'll draw upon my experience now in this role and the importance of collaborative relationships with MNPD and our team within MNPS, as well as a principal. So as principal, it was critical for me to have an SRO officer and for us to have common language, common goals around supporting our students, for that ultimate goal, right? For them to be successful now, high school, college, and beyond. And it was critical that we had relationship, right? Just strong partnership, relationship with one another in which I could go and, receive consultation from our SRO officer on a variety of topics as needed. I really looked upon our SRO officer to maintain safety and order within the building. Of course, we as principal and as school attempted to address any matters that may come up. We were the immediate response, but if it required more, as Mr. Stark mentioned, if it required additional reinforcement, if you will, then that's when the SRO officer would come into play. So it was critical that we would be on the same page. Again, that there is partnership and there was understanding about the common goals of the school. In this role now, we've collaborated with our school security team who collaborates with MNPD on a number of areas, just trying to make sure that our students are safe, making sure that we're wrapping around supports and services. So oftentimes there is information or insight that MNPD can offer to our schools that can really shape how we respond to different matters that come up or different trends that we're seeing within our school or within the community. So that's my experience at this time, and I'll be more to happy to contribute as the conversation progresses, Mr. Hughes.
And I'll kind of just add a little caveat from my early role, and then we'll definitely take questions. But coming in and looking at the various policies and practices to make certain there is a lens toward equity. And even as Dr. Springer started to allude to around the SEL, as well as those restorative practices within school, are going to be vital for us moving forward. And how do we make certain that everybody within the buildings are versed on those practices and those policies that we have moving forward? So currently, to date, I haven't, I'm going through all of that work, looking at where we are as a district, where we can be as a district, but knowing that these relationships between MNPD and the SROs are vital to Dr. Battle as well. And we want to make certain that everybody is on the same page. So we're saying the same things, we believe in the same things, and our goals are all the same, are going to be vital whenever I begin to come forth with our equity framework for the district, because all this factors into the whole student. So right now we're at our early stages of this work. As you all know, we've been really engulfed in making certain that our students, first and foremost, are achieving and have all the technology they need right now to make certain they're doing everything they can to be learning while this process of COVID and virtual learning is going on. So as we continue to give our students that support, we also want to make certain that students feel a sense of belonging in the schools, that they feel safe once they walk into the schools. So those relationships that we talk about with our SRO community, MNPD, our other security, our teachers, and our community at large are going to be vital for creating this atmosphere for all students to be able to learn and feel a sense of belonging and security when they walk into the schools. But Mrs. Roberson, Judge Blackburn, we're happy to kind of take questions from your team.
I actually have one. I'm going to start with the warm fuzzy. If you can remember, Ashford, I know it's probably been 6 months since anybody was actually in a real school building with little children that were terrified. But let's go back. Let's go back to February. February was a normal month, as normal as it could be, I guess. And you were talking about relationships. This is one of the questions we were given. Identify opportunities and resources needed for police to build relationships and increase trust by interacting with students in mentoring or coaching capacities. Now, I realize coaching capacities are limited for limiting interactions with students, but right now, based on the landscape we have and we'll probably have for the next 6 months, how can MNPS officers, not MNPS officers, Metro Nashville Police Department officers interact with students and gain trust with those students in those high schools or in those middle schools?
Go ahead, Ms. Heath.
No, go ahead, Dr. Springer. I was going to kick it off to you for that question.
Well, all right. Well, it'll be my pleasure to answer. You know, when the tornadoes hit our beautiful city of Nashville, and then COVID right after that, I saw a heavy presence of our SRO officers at the schools. I served at sites handing out materials, food, etc. And even now, and I saw heavy presence. I saw relationship building right there in the midst of it. So to answer your question, I think getting right in the middle of whatever is going on, whatever crisis is happening at this time, and really being a hands-on school level support was key. I saw families come up and actually receive diapers, bikes. You know, students were at home for months at a time with little to no interaction. They came and they were excited to interact with our SRO officers that were on site. You know, they would give them an example would be they'll give them a wooden, you know, project to complete. The students and their families would bring that project back up to the school to show them what they did. Like it just was magical to see. And so I think that whenever there is a crisis or a need in the community, when we see our SRO officers hands-on within the work, that's a great way to build relationship and trust within the community. You know, our SRO officer at the site was being pulled to the side by a parent of a student who had been expelled at some point. And, you know, she just needed some consultation about what she should do. Give her child a pep talk. And they were able to do that. Young lady walked away with a big, huge smile on her face. So I believe it really, truly is about getting in there with the schools, identifying needs alongside the schools, and working to bridge any gap, fill any gap, right? So when I, as principal, when I had SRO officers that weren't about, you know, hey, that's not my role, I don't really get that involved in activities in the school and in the building. Like it's best when they are very much involved, right? And that doesn't mean you have to plan it out and all of that, but just to catch the spirit of the school, right? Or catch the spirit of the community and have a pulse is really critical. I also find that the SRO officers were able to inform us of things that were bubbling up in the community that may spill over into the school. So there were many a days where I would have conversations on the phone with our SRO officer before school even began, right? Because they were able to advise us of, you know, an incident, and, you know, so-and-so's brother or cousin was involved, and this might be something that we need to get ahead of. So they were instrumental in assisting in us being proactive in responding to the needs of our students.
Well, let's go beyond SRO. I'm talking about just a regular MNPD officer.
Sure.
How can they become more involved and increase trust in the police department?
Absolutely. So I'll extend it. So even right now, we are meeting immediate needs of our families through, I'm going to just give you an example, our help center. So we have virtual outdoor help centers aimed at providing that one-to-one on-demand support with virtual learning. So, you know, students come up, they have a broken device, they come get a new device. If they have a question about how to get on a certain platform, we respond to that. I can envision just officers showing up at these sites. It doesn't have to be SRO officer, but showing up and just folding in, greeting our families, offering up snacks, during that session. Again, I'm just getting infused into the work. So just coming on site wherever we might be to do just that, while recognizing too that there are pieces going on around the country right now. But in partnership with Metro Nashville Public Schools, I can definitely see some pretty, orchestrated opportunities for that to occur. Mr. Hughes, Mr. Stark, I don't know if you would have anything to add to that. That was just one example of how that could look.
I mean, you basically said everything. It takes actually being in the communities, and not just once every blue moon, but like actually taking time to become a part of the communities in which you police, to get to know people, to get to know the humanity of people, to build those relationships. We are in a relationship world. We are in relationships within MNPS because we want to have those kids feel a sense of belonging. But within the community wants to feel that the people that are protecting them, keeping them safe, care about them, and they have relationships with them where they feel safe around them. And sometimes that isn't that doesn't occur, but there is more than enough opportunity for that to occur. There are more enough community events that go on in every community across Nashville. There are more than enough ways officers can inject in them and being partners with the community and learning more about the community, learning about the students that live there, learning about the family members that live there, to be able to build those relationships. So it's all about relationship building, trust building, so that everyone knows you have a vested interest in my success. And the more that our officers connect with our community-led organizations, I see Larry is on here, the more that they can their relationships with the Gideon's Army, with the alliances, with the urban leagues of the world, the more that I think we can start to smooth over those rough edges to find common ground to work together on issues to keep our community safe.
I have a question about the lower schools. How are violent incidences handled in the lower grades of schools, and what role do the police play in handling those? Like a first grader who commits a violent act.
Ken, would you like to address that?
Sure. So I guess it depends on the scope of it depends on the scope of the act. So ideally the school staff would be able to deal with it. If it's something beyond the school staff, then it would they felt that there was the need to call for more help, they would probably call our safety and security folks, and they would at the same time call MNPD to respond. And we don't have an SRO at the elementary schools, so they have to send somebody from the precinct. I think the current practice is that they try, anytime a school situation is involved, is to also send one of the sergeants that supervise the SROs, so that there's somebody with some greater familiarity of the school environment to help respond. If the police do respond, especially for a first grader, I believe the current practice is they do not arrest now unless it rises to and I don't even know with first graders, maybe Captain Levitt can clear it up, but I don't believe we arrest first graders unless maybe there's a weapon involved. And then, then we follow our typical discipline process in person.
Thank you.
I have a question, kind of elementary question. Maybe not a tag team to what Sharon said, but all little kids look up to firemen and police officers, but we don't have the SROs in the elementary schools. Is there a way to have some type of a retired police, retired fire ambassador role that they could play in the elementary school so that they have a very positive relationship and see that as a plus in their life, as opposed to some encounter later on where it may be negative?
I'm not. I certainly think that something like that is possible. I think being candid, the challenge is generally budget. So if those folks are going to be paid, somebody's got to identify the financial resources for that, and coordinating 80 plus volunteers to show up on a regular basis takes some work. So my assumption would be there would have to be some staffing component, whether on the district side or the MNPD side, or maybe both, to try to coordinate that kind of effort. So, but other than some of those logistical hurdles to jump over, I don't think there's a philosophical reason why it couldn't happen.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, I have a question.
Larry has his hand up as well.
Yes. My question is, part of this committee is not only finding out how Metro Police can play a role in the school system, but also how other organizations that can be an alternative to what's already going on and that already has a presence in Metro School, how they can play a part in being impactful in the school system, as well as playing a role with this next police chief. Are you all familiar with Gideon's Army and what they do inside the Metro Police, in the Metro school system?
So I'll jump into that and then go to Dr. Springer, but I'm familiar with what Rashida was doing and what Gideon's Army was doing at Pearl. I know that during my time in the mayor's office, I know Gideon's Army was working with the organization out of Chicago, the Violence Interrupters, and I believe you all are still working with them right now. I definitely believe that there's always a need for quality partnerships within the schools, especially as we talk about connecting with students where they are, particularly some of our young Black male students in schools, which is a focus that I'm trying to bring in as well. But I believe Dr. Springer works with a lot of our partnerships, but what we probably would need to do would be to sit down to see kind of what Gideon's Army's thoughts are moving forward, kind of the work that they've been doing fully, because I only know bits and pieces from having worked with Rashida from the mayor's office perspective, but it will be an opportunity for either Gideon's Army. I know there are other mentoring organizations that are in schools and trying to work in schools. The My Brother's Keeper Network, our juvenile clerk Lionel Matthews is working on that with myself. And there are other Black male and Black female led organizations that are in schools right now seeking to build partnerships. But I'll let Michelle or Dr. Springer talk more about some of the partnerships that she's seen. But I would dare say that we want to continue to build those relationships, build those partnerships, particularly around not just the social emotional learning, but some of the restorative practices that I know Rashida and others with Gideon's Army had championed at Pearl Cone and other schools throughout the district. But Dr. Springer, would you like to add on to that?
Well, I was just going to echo what you were saying about the need to bolster those partnerships. What we found and what we already know is that we can't do it alone. And what we're finding out more of is that there are organizations such as yourself, Mr. Turnley, that are standing ready and already touching our children, right? And influencing and impacting them. So why not join forces in a more tightly strategic manner to be able to see some impact, right? And let's track our impact in these different spaces. So I look forward to partnerships. Please, let's connect. I know that our up and coming work is to do an asset map of the different organizations that are pushing into our schools, and then how can we elevate, amplify the work that's happening, and then track our progress with our students. If we're getting this right, we should see less number of students being suspended, incarcerated, repeat offenders, so on and so forth. So I'm looking forward to doing just that. We do have a few initiatives that are happening that I really think we could, really use some help with. So let's connect, please. Some hands.
Could I ask a quick question? So my wife taught 8th grade science for a lot of years, and 8th grade's kind of a critical time. Let's just say that. And and this never happened to her, but she's seen it. She did see it around her. A student walks up and just punches the teacher. Okay, so walk me through the progression of what's going to happen to that student if it's a serious assault. From what's the role of the school, what's the role of the police, what's the role of the courts, or how do we save this kid?
Yeah, so if
Tell you what
situation,
they do, because we in the schools, what they do, they send them to us. And if a situation like that happened, we would sit that student down once everything, subside, have them sit down with that teacher, see if any kind of way they can resolve that situation, whether the student can sit down and make amends, do whatever they say that they can do for us, making amends for that crime where they don't get threw away in the system, because our whole thing is stopping the school to prison pipeline. And there's many altercations that we done had like that, not devastating where a student just beat a teacher down, but where students fight each other. And it's amazing when you sit them down and they have a time to think and calm down and be able to express themselves, because most of the time they don't have an opportunity to express themselves, so they just react, and then don't nobody listen, and then they thrown into the system, and once they get into the system, they thrown away for good, because nobody really just sit there and listen to them and give them an opportunity to whether apologize or acknowledge what they have done wrong, because we know development of the child mind, especially Black males, it takes a while before they get to that point where they thinking before they react, especially coming from the community that we come from. We don't, know what I'm saying, everything is extreme. Do something extreme. You know what I'm saying? We don't know how to go outside the extreme because we haven't been taught. So we need people inside those schools who can get to the children outside of the police. Everybody keep thinking we need a police. We need retired fire chiefs and all that. No, we need community members that know these children inside these schools who are going to grab these children that they listen to and be able to stop it right there before even get to hitting the child. We just too reactive, you know what I'm saying, in all the things we do instead of being proactive. And that's what this whole thing needs to be about. Stopping things before it gets there. And that's adding the community. Stop thinking that we always got to have an overseer or the police right there to make us do the right thing. You know what I'm saying? We do have respected community members that can do something, or will do have the ears of the youth out here. And we got to pay attention to that. So
yeah, I agree, Larry. Can we, because we have to be mindful of our time, and thank you, Larry, for that. But Bob had a question. Can we walk through that sequence really shortly and concisely of if a child commits an actual battery, let's say something like that? I get it. Where Gideon's Army is available, that's a good alternative. What happens when Gideon's Army is not there? A student does assault a teacher in middle school, let's say. What happens to that child, and how does that child interface with the police department?
absolutely. So the first step is to regain order, maintain order, right? So that's calm the situation down, remove the parties from the situation, allow them space, time to just calm. That's number one. Number two is to gather the relevant information. What happened prior to the incident, what happened during the incident, and then what was the disposition after the incident. In all of that, we want to make sure that we are giving each party due process. So we're hearing from our students what happened from your perspective. Like, talk it through it. Like, don't just write it down. Let's talk through it. Let's process through that. For the adult, they also have an opportunity to record the incident as it has occurred. And then once we have gathered the information, then we go through a process of determining what the response will be, right? So we're contacting parents, of course. We are alerting them so let them know what has occurred and what information we have found. If additional investigation needs to occur, right? Statements from students within the class, statements from students within the hallway, adults within the hallway, and then we come up with a conclusion, right, based upon the evidence from all parties. And then there's a response, and you mentioned a pretty, at the point that a student has, physically assaulted an adult, there is a response for that, right? And, that response could range from, just depending, right? And rarely, it ends in a conversation, right? Definitely. But then also there are responses such as restorative conferencing. There's a response of in-school suspension. There is out-of-school suspension. There is expulsion. So that's the range of responses that would happen, right? But there are factors that go into making that final determination that, that we would have to consider when we're making that determination. One thing that's key as principal, always wanted to know, like, and as principal supervisor, what were the supports that were in place prior to this situation, right? What were the, did the student have a safety plan? Was the safety plan followed? Like, right? What were the supports that we were providing to the student prior to? And then what are the supports that we want to provide to them now that this has occurred? What supports do we want to provide to that teacher now that this has occurred? How do we repair that environment, right? If a student were to return, or a staff member were to return back to that classroom, how do we repair to make sure that the conditions are present for students to continue and maintain learning?
Okay, all right. There are a number of responses. Does anyone have any last words? So we have to move to Captain David Levitt, but I would ask if an individual on this committee has some additional questions. Are these three people available? I guess we could work through you, Ashford, to get our questions to you in writing, because there may be some follow-up about really some of the discretion that's there. Our concern, of course, at the YW, we have a lot of children have suffered significant trauma and significant violence. And so it would be expected, unfortunately, that they may react violently to situations that that's just not a normal response for some, but it's normal within what they have seen. So I want to make sure that those kids are taken care of within the school system and not necessarily in a policing way. But we're there. So anything else, Judge Blackburn?
You're on mute, Judge
You're
Blackburn.
muted. You're muted.
Thank you for being here. We really appreciate your participation.
And Judge Blackburn and Sharon, I will follow back up with Larry as well, because I do believe there may be some legalese into who's within MNPS's buildings, but I'll follow up with him on that process as well. But send any questions to me. We'll make certain to get them back to you as quick as possible, but we're here ready and available to help out any way you need us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much, Ashford.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good seeing you, Mr. Foster.
Now we're moving to Captain.
You too, Dr. Springer.
Captain Levitt, response to youth violence from the Metro Nashville Police Department.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm Captain David Levitt. I've been with the police department for about 19 years. I've been the captain over the Custom Services Division for the past year. And prior to that, I was the lieutenant in this division for 4 years. So I've been involved with the SROs for over 5 years now. And I guess when you talk about community engagement and youth engagement, the SROs have been doing this for a long time, and they do it really well. The relationships they have, the partnerships they have, the closeness they have with these kids, it's unlike anything else that we do in the police department, and they do a great job. So I want to give you a bit of an overview of the SRO program. Their main purposes are to provide a safe environment for students, faculty, and administrative personnel, to provide positive role models for the youth in the schools, to promote close working relationships between law enforcement, students, and faculty members, and to provide intervention and prevention programs for the youth within the school environment. Obviously, we don't have an SRO in every school. We have 1 lieutenant, 7 sergeants, and 57 SROs right now. We're about 7 positions short. And those folks are broken down into 15 high schools and 32 middle schools. In relation to a point that was brought up earlier, we do not have SROs in the elementary schools. So to address that, a couple of years ago, we began developing youth engagement teams. We call them YETIs. There's 4 SROs who are assigned to these youth engagement teams. and they on a rotating basis visit the elementary schools, visit with the kids, read to the kids, engage with the kids, have lunch with the kids, and start building these relationships, because we know the longer we wait to start building these relationships, the more chances we are that we're going to lose kids, and we're not going to develop that rapport. They also assist in some of the middle schools that aren't covered right now due to shortages, and they build that rapport with the elementary students in their clusters. Up until 3 years ago, the school resource officers were assigned to the precincts. So if your precinct had 8 SROs because of the schools that you had in your precinct, you'd have 8 SROs assigned to your precinct and a supervisor. And what we found was that each precinct did things a little bit differently, and there wasn't a lot of consistency, and the SROs didn't feel like they kind of were a united group, and they didn't feel as supported as possibly they could be. So I took an idea that I'd floated before unsuccessfully, and I dusted it off, and I brought it to Deputy Chief John Drake. The Support Services Bureau had just been created. He was going to be our deputy chief, and Custom Services had been put in that bureau. So I had a new opportunity with a new chief to sell this idea that I had to improve the SRO program. Knowing that he was a former SRO and a former coach and a former mentor, I knew that he would understand where I was coming from. And my idea was to make the School Resource Officer Unit a freestanding unit. So now he agreed, and we implemented the program almost immediately. So now we have 1 lieutenant overseeing the 7 sergeants, and if we were fully staffed, 66 SROs. And they're divided regionally, not by precinct, so you have a more equitable distribution of the SROs. Prior to that, we had 1 school resource sergeant that had 3 SROs, and we have another one that had a dozen. So I think they feel more unified now. They feel like they have someone supporting them, and it's been very positive. And so I really have to give props to Chief Drake for that, because he's the one that made it happen. So when we select SROs due to vacancies, what we do is we try to find the SRO that's going to best fill that spot. And this folks on this call know better than I that each school is a little different. Each school has a little bit of different feel. Some schools need more of a hands-on person. Some schools need more of a quieter, more laid-back person. So we match our SROs to the school, and I think we do a pretty good job of it. SROs go through some very specific training. They go through what's called the NASRO training, National Association of School Resource Officers, and that includes mentor, educator, and law enforcement aspects. And I'll talk more about the great curriculum and the Rites of Passage Boyhood to Manhood program, but some of that, being able to present that to the kids, is some of the training the SROs go through. They also go through ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. We've had training in the trauma-informed approach, and that's kind of one of the things that we've really focused on the last couple of years is getting to these kids that have had trauma in the home, because you can't approach them the same way that you do the quote-unquote average kid. Not that there is an average kid, but these kids that have been exposed to trauma have some real deep concerns that need to be addressed, and we try to get those kids the help that they need, and give them a little extra support so that they can be successful. We also train in human trafficking, mental health first aid, and in total, the SROs every single year get 16 hours of specialized training in addition to their in-service training to make them the best qualified they can be to be an SRO. Some of the partnerships we have, the Youth Services Division, especially the counseling services, Lonnie Ramos is a huge part of that. She trains officers on childhood development and is involved in a lot of the counseling that we do and we try to do everything but arrest. So she's a big part of that on the counseling side. The MNPD's LGBTQ liaison officer, Nakia Reed, is a big help with her anti-bullying program. Not only is she the LGBTQ liaison, she's also a former SRO. So she's been involved in helping out with that Yeti team, that youth engagement. She's got the anti-bullying campaign that she's trying to get going in the schools and building that. And she deals with LGBTQ youth, not only in our schools, but homeless LGBTQ youth through Oasis Center, and has established some great partnerships there. We also sit on panels to include the MNPS disciplinary panels alongside juvenile court representatives to assure that we're providing all the services we can without arrest when possible. We're part of the Alignment Nashville group to ensure fair and equitable discipline is provided and outside resources are available to students and families. We work with Director of Security Reginald Young to provide safe spaces for kids, and we do a full threat assessment protocol so that administrators can alert the proper authorities when a student may be a harm to themselves or others. We also work with Student Services, Ms. Williams and Stephanie Davis, who provide training, mentorships, and speaking opportunities. We also get to sit in on the First Time Offenders program because we want the first time to be the last time. So we want to be involved in those discussions and see what we can do to help. And I mentioned Oasis Center. We deal with Mother to Mother, the Bookem events, Ride for Reading, Judge Calloway's Trunk or Treat, and all kinds of other opportunities that we have throughout the year and even in the summer to engage with these kids. So they are the first responders to all violations of law on the MNPS campus. Their focus is on diversion and keeping the kids in the classroom. And as I said, arrest is typically the last resort for our kids. We consult with ADA Stacy Miller for guidance before arrest so that we can explore all avenues when possible. The majority of the time, this leads to referring to school discipline or referral to juvenile court, which avoids arrest or citations for the students. They are not school disciplinarians, they don't enforce school rules, and they don't recommend punishment. And I think that's important for folks to know that we are not making sure that you go to class on time or enforcing dress codes or any of those types of things. We want to be the good guys. We want to be the mentors. We want to be the people the students feel like they can come and talk to. And it's amazing how much these kids open up to their SROs when they feel comfortable with them. Sometimes that's the only person they'll talk to. And then the school administrator, faculty, and staff, they make every effort to utilize MNPS resources before it comes to law enforcement, because that's, in the end, that's what we want. We want to be a part of we want to help, but at the end of the day, we want to be handling this in-house whenever possible, and usually in counseling, using restorative justice programs, and using other means to get these kids where they need to be. The youth engagement team is probably one of the most exciting things we've done since I've been up here, getting in those elementary schools and seeing the kids' faces. I'm sure you all see the pictures on social media, and working with the FOP and getting kids bikes and getting beds for kids that are sleeping on the floor and things that we really get out and actively seek this out. Right now, during COVID, one of the big things we're doing is we're going and finding kids, so to speak, or checking on kids that we haven't heard from. There are kids out there that we haven't heard from since online learning started. So we've partnered with MNPS to try and help locate these kids, help them with the laptop distribution, meal distribution, and just anything we can do until we get full-time, get everybody 100% back to in-person learning. I talked a little bit about the great curriculum. We've been teaching that since 1996. It's the Drug Abuse and Resistance Education Program, and it's taught in elementary and middle schools. And then in the summertime, we have 6 great camps that we have every summer for kids that otherwise wouldn't get to go to a summer camp. And it's a great team building, relationship building time for these kids. Most of these kids are inner city kids that have never gotten to go to a camp, and they get to be with their friends and learn things and have fun and get out of the house, so to speak, for a while. And they're just a huge hit every single year. A few years ago, one of our SROs, Angela Booker, started the Team 1 camp. And what she did is she identified that we had some exceptional needs students that didn't get to go to these camps because of their needs. So this camp lets 20 to 30 kids go to summer camp every year who have different needs, so that they still get to take part in those activities and feel like they're included. And the boyhood to manhood, that's that small group mentoring that we're starting to do within MNPS. It's groups of 6 to 8, and it's that small group discussions, just really being open, trying to get these kids to choose a path that involves education and being safe and being successful versus we want to get away from that school to prison pipeline and try to keep these kids going in the right direction as much as we can. We staff all the basketball and football games, which is another opportunity for mentorship and engagement, as well as the safety factor. We work with outside agencies such as Bookham, Ride for Reading, and Mother to Mother. Back to School Bash every fall. We just tons of school supplies, and the community really chips in and make sure these kids have everything they need for school. And right now, like I said, we're just helping with meal distribution and laptop distribution and doing whatever we can during this virtual learning. And the SROs are so creative. I mean, they're using Zoom meetings and they're finding ways to engage with their kids. So it's really been cool to see them at work. And I'll finish with a quick story before I take questions. Yesterday, I went to a retirement. And it was an SRO who had 28 years of service. And he was retiring, and we gave him his plaque. And Chief Drake said a few words, and I said a few words, but it really got interesting when the sergeants and the officers that he worked with got up and started talking, and the passion in their voices, and Mark Bennett in particular. Many of you who have been around our SROs know who Mark Bennett is. When he got up and spoke, the passion in his voice about these kids, the passion about the relationships with these kids, and he told the officer who was retiring, he said, I respect your decision to retire. He said, but I need you to promise me that even if after you're retired, you'll find some way to work with kids because that's who you are. And of course, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, but the SROs are a special group. I don't know how else to put it. If every sworn officer in this department could engage with the community, could engage with kids the way the SROs do, that would be amazing. I think every police officer in this department could learn a lot from our SROs. With that, I'll take any questions you have.
Our students given their Miranda rights anytime they are questioned by SROs.
You were breaking up a little bit. Do we get the Miranda rights anytime they're arrested?
I said, our students given their Miranda rights anytime they are questioned by SROs.
If they're being lawfully detained or subject to arrest, then they would have to be Mirandized before there could be any investigative questioning, yes.
Okay, but if you asking them like personal questions about trauma in their household, what would that entail?
Miranda wouldn't apply to that.
Okay. Well, what about is a parent or a community member present when you questioning or you asking these children, questions pertaining to what's going on in their personal lives?
So I'm hearing two different questions. If we're just talking to the student about a personal issue or trying to help them or talk about a situation, then no, Miranda would not be the case, and they wouldn't have to have a parent present if they felt comfortable talking about it. On the other hand, if we have serious criminal charges and we're going to actually do an interrogation, a fact-finding type of interrogation, then Miranda would apply, and they would have a right to have a parent or guardian present. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Could I ask you? You mentioned what if every police officer could learn from the SROs? I mean, is there some kind of in the future? Is there some kind of process where there could be more interaction and more learning? I mean, that's a great what if. It's like I'm guessing the heart is a big part of what these SRs. They have huge hearts and they love people. And what is there any way to spread that?
Well, it's a great question, and I think a lot of it is the individual, the type of heart they have, and you have to love kids to want to be an SRO and be in that environment with literally hundreds or maybe even thousands of children. But I think you're right. I think the SROs could teach the other officers a lot, and perhaps if we have an officer, I don't know that it's practical for them all to shadow an SRO, but maybe if we have an officer who just doesn't seem to be getting that engagement and getting how to deal with kids or youth, maybe we send them to a school and have them shadow an SRO for a few days and see how it's done. So that's a really good point.
Maybe if there was training in community engagement, one of the activities is a day shadowing an SRO, for example.
Well, and that's definitely, the community engagement teams are becoming the key. Obviously, we still have crime. We still have things that need to be investigated, and there's always going to be folks who have to be arrested for one reason or another. But our priority moving forward is to do as much engagement and as much partnership building as we can. So what we're doing in the schools is exactly what we're trying to take out to the community with these engagement teams. Walking patrols, meeting people on their porch, talking to people, building those relationships. So yes, sir, absolutely.
Officer Levitt, I really appreciate your sharing with us. Thank you so much. I'm a teacher myself. I have been in 4 different middle schools. I have been in schools that did have SROs. I've been in schools that didn't have SROs. And I've seen a variety of SROs. I've seen a couple that were excellent, that wanted to build relationships and that actually listened in the relationship when teachers and students were interacting and really provided excellent support. I've also seen some that generally do not engage well with the students and do not make it a positive environment for students. My concern, Officer Levitt, as a teacher, is that going back to the 1950s, we maybe had 100 SROs in schools. And you just mentioned, and I mean nationally, maybe had 100. And you just mentioned that in Nashville, if we were fully staffed, we would have 66. So in one city. So we've exponentially increased. I am very concerned about the reality of the school to prison pipeline. So I am concerned about the data related to the school to prison pipeline and the role that SROs play in that. And I would hope that we can get some more information about that data and that relationship, because talking about building relationships is good, and I've seen it done well, but I've also seen it done poorly. And when it's done poorly, the students suffer. And I don't want any more students to suffer, especially in a place that's supposed to be safe like a school. Does that make sense, sort of what I'm asking?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I would say if you come upon an SRO that you don't think is doing what an SRO should be doing or doesn't have the right attitude or the right feel, certainly we would want to know about that. But as far as the relationship building, that is at the forefront of everything we do. We have a great relationship with Judge Calloway and her staff. And unless there's a gun involved or a serious assault, you just don't see us taking many kids to jail in the metro school system. I mean, the numbers, I don't have the exact numbers of how many arrests we made last year, but the numbers pretty much speak for themselves on school campuses. We do not make a lot of arrests at all. And I credit that to the relationship that the SROs have with the students, the relationship the SROs have with the administration, the teachers, juvenile court, the counselors, and all of the folks who come together to work on this.
And on that, I'm going to have to stop everyone. I cannot believe I've known Judge Calloway since she started running for judge. We started running at the same time. So I've known you about 8 years, and I have never known you to sit quietly for this long in your entire life.
I'm trying to be respectful.
I know, but everything they've talked about is your children in your court and your babies. So it's your turn.
All right. And I will piggyback on what Captain Levitt just started talking about. That yeah. He gave me a literal softball, and I was just trying to pull up the numbers of the decrease that we had in arrests in a year's period. I think we went from about in 1 year, and I can't find it on my hands right now, but we went down from literally like maybe 100 arrests to like 16 in a year. And it was really a wonderful cooperation between us and the schools and the SROs and the police department. I agree with, I can't remember his name, what the teacher just said, that at a while ago, there were times where there were SROs that just didn't fit the role of an SRO. And they clearly probably didn't want to be SROs, and because they were in the precinct, they didn't get the same type of, I guess, review. But Captain Levitt was absolutely correct. When they moved to having the SROs be just a freestanding, I guess, part of the police department, and Lieutenant Proctor has done an amazing job of leading them and making sure that everybody who's an SRO wants to be an SRO, and everybody who's there understands that their role is not to do discipline for the school. Their role is not to immediately arrest people. Their role is to help and to provide guidance and to help our students. And there has definitely been a change since we've been working together. We've also included in a lot of our conversations the mobile crisis unit. And so someone asked earlier, what happens when elementary students, something happens and there's not SRO, what happens then? And so we had a lot of talks because we had several, and I can give you an example of one case at a particular school. It was a school in North Nashville where a kid literally was having a mental health breakdown. And this child literally, it was an elementary student. I think she was in second grade. She undressed in the middle class. She started defecating on herself, and she was picking it up and throwing it like around the room. Now, it was a very disturbing incident. And, the teacher was able to get all the students out and get them safely put somewhere else. And they kind of locked her in the room by herself and tried to de-escalate as much as they could. And nothing was working. And so they eventually called the police. And, what the police do when they get called to the scene, if they can't control something or something, they arrested her and they brought her down to juvenile court, which was, we all determined in the end, and including the police, that just wasn't the appropriate thing. First and foremost, it was clear it was a mental health breakdown. And secondly, we don't hold children in detention, especially under 12, and especially for misdemeanor offenses. We're not allowed to hold them. And so it was a traumatizing event to someone who obviously was going through some trauma. And so we met with the police department, with mobile crisis unit, with the schools, and this was about 3 years ago. And we said, the answer can't be call the police. That just is not the correct way to deal with something like that. And so we have to call mobile crisis. Mobile crisis, when they were calling, basically we're saying, is the child suicidal or homicidal? If not, we can't come to the scene to help. And so we were able to kind of maneuver that and say it should not just be suicidal, homicidal. If they know that it's a mental health breakdown and they know something's going on, you all should be able to help. And so what they made an agreement with the school was that mobile crisis, if they couldn't come to the scene, that they would still call the police, and the police could take them to mobile crisis and not to juvenile court, because juvenile court was not the place for that child to be. And so there were a couple of cases that we had like that involved elementary students. And there was another one that she refused to go back to her school or back to her class, and was, I guess, disruptive in the cafeteria, and literally refusing to go to that class, and was brought down to juvenile court. And what we learned is that child had recently lost a parent, and it was a long story, but it was, again, some more trauma. And all we did when we called the police as a system, we re-traumatized this child. And so those kind of the cases, we are happy to say that we don't see those anymore, or as far as I know, we haven't seen those in a while. And that's because of our partnership with the police and the SRO unit and the school system. I'll also say that we have been very active with the SRO unit in doing training. And so every year we go and we talk to the SROs right before school starts. Of course, we haven't done it this year, but we go and we talk to them, just remind them about, what the courts do, what their role is. I go along with Kathy Simback, court administrator, and Stacy Miller, the district attorney, and Rob Robinson, the public defender, and Dana Wolf, who serves as our victim advocate. And so we always go and we talk to the SRO unit about just different things that they see and things that court's going to do and things that court's not going to do. And so that is very helpful as well with our relationship. And I think we have definitely seen a lot of improvement in the type of cases that come to juvenile court, and just reducing the number of kids that get arrested from the school. We got some more work we can do for sure, but we definitely have improved a lot. Any questions?
That's amazing, Judge Calloway.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We work hard. We're trying to stop that school to prison pipeline. It's a real thing, and it's our goal to literally keep our youth in the school system all the time, in active programming in the schools, and helping our SROs and our principals and our teachers to understand truly what ACEs are and truly how important it is to do restorative justice in our school system. If a kid comes to school and they just were part of seeing their mom get beat up by her boyfriend or their dad, and they're hiding under the bed all night long, and they come into the school and they can't sit still, or they don't want anybody to touch them because they're agitated or they're scared, and are they sleepy and they lay their head on the table, and the teacher immediately gets into them about that. We're re-traumatizing kids, and we're taking them away from actively participating in the school process. And so we are hopeful that all schools will start doing more restorative justice, more practices to make sure that every child's needs are taken into consideration as whatever's happening to them. Some of the schools that we know that we worked with are Napier Elementary, Fall Hamilton, Pearl Cone with Gideon's Army, DuPont Hadley. All of them have pretty much full restorative practices from the top down, principal down, where they're doing restorative circles in the morning, where they're talking, they're doing check-ins. So every student has someone they check in with every day to make sure that whatever their needs are getting addressed. Not just worrying about the schools and the scores, but making sure that if they didn't get to eat, or if they didn't, weren't able to get a book or something, that all of those things are getting resolved. The morning circles, I know DuPont Hadley does them, are amazing because you start the day off where they're eating breakfast and they're in a circle and they're talking about whatever issue that the teacher wants to bring up. And it does so much for each of the children that are in the school. It helps them to recognize the needs of their classmates. It helps them to learn empathy for one another, and it just helps them to have a better day. And so what we do also know is that the schools who have adopted full restorative justice practices wall to wall are also the ones that have done an amazing job of improving their test scores. And so it all runs hand in hand. They have super low suspension and expulsion rates, super low, just in disciplinary issues, and they are improving in their test scores and everything else. And so we know it works, and we know it's a positive thing. And so we're working with all of the schools to help do better. Dr. Springer didn't mention, but one of the things that we are doing now is we've had youth courts in 6 of the schools, high schools. And what youth court is basically if a child who's at, let's say, goes to McGavick, and a child picks up a minor charge, a misdemeanor, shoplifting, or disorderly conduct, or driving without a license, something that is a minor charge, we allow that charge to be handled by the youth court. We trained in the last 2 years, we've trained about 250 of the students around Metro on the process of youth courts. And what they do is they serve every role of a court system except for the judge. We have a adult attorney or me or one of the magistrates who actually serve as the judge. And so they serve as attorneys for the state, attorneys for the child who caused the offense. They serve as the court clerk. They serve as the court officer. They serve as interpreters if we need them. They serve as caseworkers. So they follow the kid, the child who's committed the offense. They make sure that they're doing the things that they're supposed to do, and they serve as jury of their peers. And so we train them on each and every role that they serve on, and they handle the case from beginning to end. The child who caused the offense or got the charge has to acknowledge that they did the offense. And once they do that, then it goes in front of the youth court and they decide on what the consequences or what the result should be. And it has to be something related to their school community, something that will help them to be an improvement to the school. So whether it's like working at the concession stand or whether it's when one kid was there for truancy, not coming to school. And what we found out is he was not connected to anything in the school, but he liked to play soccer. He couldn't get on the team because his grades were so low. And so part of his consequence was that and they had worked it out before the actual hearing with the judge, but they talked to the coach and said, can he be a manager on the team? And so he became a manager on the team, which meant that he had to go to school every day. He had to work on his grades, and he got connected to the soccer team, which is what he wanted to do. And so we saw much improvement in his grades and in his attendance and everything else. And so youth courts are an extremely powerful restorative tool that we are happy to be part of the school. And so this year, what we're doing is expanding all the youth courts to all 12 of the zoned high schools. And we're opening up to all of the middle schools as well to do disciplinary issues at all of the middle schools. And so DuPont, Hadley, and Antioch Middle School already have youth courts that do discipline issues. And they literally allow a team, a trained team of students that go through the youth court training to hear any cases of discipline issues. And since it's I guess a jury of their peers, they make a decision about what the discipline result should be. And so they do a lot of stuff like they make people go through tutoring. They make them do apology letters if it's a teacher that they got in trouble with. Whatever it is, they make it connected to the offense and the person that they offended, and it helps them to understand accountability. And so we're excited to continue to partner with the schools and to expand our youth court beyond what we were doing already. We're of course having struggles because of COVID, but we actually taped this year all of the training, and so the students are going to watch it as part of their classes, and hopefully we'll start to be able to do some cases. So that's what we're doing with the schools and the SROs, and we've got a lot of good things happening, and we're definitely seeing a decrease in the number of kids who are arrested at school.
I just wanted to build on that. My motto in my classroom is I care more about you as a person than I do as a student. So that interweaves everything I do. It's very social, emotional learning. So I would say it's incredibly effective when you create that environment. I would agree wholeheartedly. I even made space today because of the verdict yesterday in the Breonna Taylor case. I made space today for students to be able to talk about it because I was hurting. So I said, I am self-aware. I'm hurting. I'm not myself today. I'm hurting. Let's talk about this. So I think one of the pushes has been the more we can look at holistic education with what we are doing to engage the whole child, then the more that will produce results that everybody else wants as it relates to academic. So I'm 100% in favor, and I just appreciate the way you were able to speak to all of those issues. The other thing, when you let kids decide discipline, they're going to be meaner. Like those joke. Those kids are going to be meaner. They ain't afraid to give a hard. Woo!
Yeah,
so I just want to say that.
Yeah, I agree with you. They are so hard. Like one case I was sitting in, and we have an adult attorney sitting with the jury as they deliberate, and they were like, oh, we think he should do 100 hours of public service work. And I was like, no, let's come down a little. They are so hard on each other. But it's so helpful. It's so helpful when it's coming from their peers and they really see how it affects them and they talk about that. And so it's really, really, really good. But you're absolutely right. They are so much harder sometimes than we are.
Yes, how you doing, Judge? My name is Larry, and I'm. My question is, first, I am the fitness instructor down at Juvenile. I go before COVID. I was going down there weekly, exercising with the with the youth down there. And
Wonderful.
yes, many of them know me. Plus, I've been involved in Spooktober, a Spooktacular. One of them, you know.
Spectacular, yeah.
Yes, I've been involved in that also, and I guess it'll be canceled this year.
We're actually going to do it this year. We're just going to do a drive-through.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, if you will contact me through the court, we're still doing it. Or contact me or Yolanda, and we'll get you hooked up. And so we're doing it in the Titans parking lot, in a couple of parking lots they've given us, and it's going to be a drive-through.
Okay. Well,
so yeah, we would love for you to participate.
All right. And my question is, would you recommend that Gideon's Army have a bigger role in Metro schools?
Oh, absolutely. I definitely think that any organization, particularly Gideon's Army and others, should definitely have a bigger role in the schools. I also think the schools have struggled over years, really, really with our, particularly with our alternative schools. And we have worked with, I think it's Myron Franklin, maybe saying his name wrong, at Johnson School. And he is dying to have more community partners to come in and help him. He's doing a great job, the best he can do without a lot of support. And a lot of times we don't do, as a system, we don't treat kids that get sent to alternative schools the way they should be treated. They are the same students who have the capabilities of learning and have the capabilities of changing. And then we kind of, in the past, would throw them into alternative school and say, good luck, and we'll see you out when you finish your year, which was not very helpful. And I think from my talks with the school system, and particularly with Dr. Franklin, they really want to make a better role at the alternative schools, and they really are asking and reaching for community organizations to come out and be a part of their effort. So I definitely think every school needs to have as many community programs to help out, because some community programs are good for certain kids and some are not, and every kid is not fitted for the same programs. And so the more programs you have, I think the better opportunity you have to connect with all of the students. And I particularly definitely believe that we have to get more programs into our alternative schools, such as Johnson.
All right, thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Are there any other questions? I know Judge Calloway is always there, ready, willing, and able to answer any additional questions. I guess she's in her quiet phase today. When she quit talking, I said, is this Sheila Calloway?
I didn't want to take all the conversation. I'm trying to give everybody else a chance to talk too.
Okay, all right.
Well, and I'm trying to learn just a little from you, but I just cannot help myself expressing how blessed this community is to have you in this role. Thank you for all you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. Thank you.
She's the enterprise of money.
We've made some inroads.
Understatement.
Thank you, Judge Calloway.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay. Next on our agenda, we were going to have the data working group. I don't know if Dia has come back. I do have the report from David. They continue the committee to gather an inventory of relevant policies and procedures. It was such dense information that they're trying to see what would be most helpful in a short period of time. They're going to analyze the policies and provide feedback to us, to all three of the committees. They're also working on a dashboard with performance indicators that is currently used by MNPD, as well as suggestions of performance metrics that might help. They're going to look at the department's goals for 2021 and objectives and potential key indicators that they can add. They've gotten, everything is available in SharePoint. If you want to look at a particular data point, it is in the SharePoint site. If you have any issues getting in, let John or Eric or someone else know. Please ask our committee members to review the data available on SharePoint. That's one thing he put in there. And they said that if there are any additional requests for data that this committee needs, they're asking us to let the data committee know by October 1st at 9 a.m. And so that's the report of the data committee.
Madam Vice Chair, this is Dia Cirillo, and you did an excellent job.
I didn't know you were back.
But if anybody has any questions, I just wanted to be sure that all the members of the committee are aware that what we're working towards is a half-day planning session with data committee members and the chairs to help ensure alignment for each committee in terms of their goals and recommendations and problem statements, as well as across committees. So everybody got an email about that, and I'm happy to take questions offline as well. Thanks all.
What recommendations do you all have at this point? We've heard information on Metro Public Schools. We've heard information on community policing and neighborhood policing. We need recommendations from the committee. Who has a recommendation?
Judge Blackburn, I was going to ask, and I think my recommendation is to have specific metrics to school reopenings, right? What does it look like? How does the structure look like when we, at least high school students, go back to school in 2021? And what professional development have resource officers received in this time so they can prepare for a new world in 2021? So when it comes to a recommendation, is exactly what Judge Calloway was saying, is empowering youth to learn about the process, hearing authentic voices, but also what I would like to know now is how exactly is the district preparing for 2021 when our high school students are going to be facing a very different world than the one they left in February and March.
Okay, if I understand that, you're looking at something within the SRO or the interface of SROs and MNPS. One, empowering youth programs, but two, also that children may be a little bit behind or had some trauma or something like that. So they're coming back to school. So you may have disciplinary issues that you did not have before because they have been out of school for a length of time. So that is, you're saying what training or what additional resources do SROs have to help the school community? Is that kind of where you're going?
Yeah, and what training have SROs received in this time? Just highlighting what Eli was saying, we're living in a different world than the one we left in February. So we have to acknowledge, and Mr. Truly, what you exactly said a couple of minutes ago is we need to tackle the issue of trust. We need to tackle the issue of relationship building. And we cannot come back assuming that the world will be the same as it was in February, specifically when it comes to racial justice matters.
Okay.
You're muted, Judge Blackburn.
What we've also heard is Children may have been exposed to different traumas while they've been gone. And whether it be the tornado, whether it be family traumas, whether it be violence at the home, whatever it is, and they're going to come back with a different perspective or a different, as Judge Calloway was saying, come in and put their head down because they're afraid and they don't have anywhere else to go. And this is maybe the first safe place they've been in 6 months is that classroom.
I'm almost more concerned about anger and how the pent up anger that may be in their system in the classroom and the traditional way of when you act out, you're put out. I know that the representative from MNPS said there are these various options, and that's a follow-up question for me. How do you determine which option you take? Because if there are people who are acting out as a result of this anger, and all of a sudden they end up in that expulsion, we know what that leads to. So it's those sorts of things of de-escalate, learning how to de-escalate the situation, even more so than ever. I think the SROs are going to have to work with the school community, with the schools as a whole, to make sure we can get on top of that.
I can speak to that one, Ms. Roberson. One of the things as a teacher, we have a discipline matrix. And several years ago, there was a study on discipline disparity in the schools. And the study showed that you were 3 times more likely to get suspended or expelled if you were Black as if you were white. So they developed a discipline matrix at that point. So the discipline matrix guides what we do as teachers when we interact with our students. So if a student does something, it gets a certain level of offense, so a 200 level or 300 level or 100 level, and each of those have different discipline responsibilities with them. So I believe that my understanding when Dr. Springer was saying it could be different, it depends on how the level would play out. So just to speak to that, that's sort of how that's done, or that's supposed to be how that's done, is there is a leveled system within our school system. I have one suggestion that may be somewhat controversial. So I think one of the encouraging things that I've heard has been in community engagement in policing. Also, the SRO has talked about community engaging in policing. And I keep hearing Councilperson Gamble say, we don't have the resources. And I keep hearing Bob say, one of the hardest things to do is to reallocate. So here is my proposal. I want us to think about the possibility of, is there an intersection between SROs and community engagement policing? Could the community engagement group be housed at a school? Or could the SRO be housed at somewhere else in the community and spend some time in the school? How could that work to maximize our resources? Because if I heard Judge Calloway correctly, she said they had 16 arrests in the schools last year, and there are 59 SROs in the very schools. That's a lot of SROs for that few arrests. I'm not saying take them out. I'm simply saying, how can we creatively combine the two pieces of what the SROs do that is community-based and what community-based policing? Is there an intersection? I'm just thinking, is that possible?
I need to restate what I said. I apologize. That was for our elementary students. That number was for elementary. I apologize. I don't have the number for high school arrest.
You see why I was like, whoa, that's why I was, okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's helpful.
When I thought about that, I was like, oh, that's an amazingly good number. Yeah, I imagine it's a lot higher in high schools, but we were focusing on actually 12 and under. So those are for the 12 and under arrest. And also add, I don't know if this is my time to add stuff, but when you were talking about the matrix and the grid, I was a part of, along with, I think at the time, Gordon Howey, but we were a part of, from the police department, the Passage Initiative, which is the one that helped to do the grid, Positive and Safe Schools, Advancing Greater Equity. And through that efforts and the grids, we did a great job of reducing the total numbers of suspensions and expulsions throughout the MNPS over the years that we put it in place. However, the disparity numbers never changed. And so you are still much, much, much more likely to be suspended or expelled if you're Black versus if you are non-Black. And so it's a passage is still active and still meeting and still trying to address those things, but it's something that we still struggle with.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to kind of piggyback off Juliana. I think I'm saying her name correct. Is we in a new world, and all the things that happened prior to COVID, along with the recession that we living in, along with all of the social conditions that's going on, people are psychologically traumatized by these events. However, we go back and we go and look at data from events that took place that's similar to what's going on today, such as like Hurricane Katrina. The data from that, which a whole lot of homelessness took place. We got a whole lot of homelessness taking place right now. Breonna Taylor, go back and look at what took place after Trayvon Martin, the effect that it had on the community, because we got all that going on right now. Also, like I said, unemployment at an all-time high. Go back and look at the 2008 recession. Look at the data from that. See how it affected our community. There's a whole lot of data that you get that of events that took place that we get all of it in 2020 right now. So if we go back and look at the data from those type of events that took place, maybe we can see that when Hurricane Katrina happened, how did it affect Black youth in New Orleans? You know what I'm saying? How did they respond, you know what I'm saying, from being homeless, from being sick or displaced in different cities? You know, it's like I said, the data is there, but we just got to look at some of the events that took place and then factor all that in.
One thing I would like to say is, and it's drawing on what you're talking about, Larry, is I think most of us would be in agreement that we've had a level of success with community policing, and it should be something that we should have some recommendation around, something like that. We also have heard from both the SRO officer as well as others that even though we have dedicated units to community policing, that the other areas of police throughout the system could learn best practices or lessons from the community policing and the SRO officers. So maybe having something of a culture of every officer seeing themselves as somewhat of a community police person as opposed to just those that are designated as such. And so it could touch on all aspects. We'll have dedicated community policing officers, but all officers should have somewhat of an exposure and somewhat of a belief that they are community police. Does that make any sense to anyone?
Does to me, for sure. That's great.
Yes. Go ahead, Bob.
Well, I was just going to say, if that mindset could be a part of the culture, and I think as I look at what recommendations do we make, I want more of the SRO that we heard described today. I want more of the community policing. I want that kind of attitude shift. I want more involvement by all the nonprofits. And obviously Larry keeps educating us really well on Gideon's Army, and thank you for that. And there's others though that can come alongside them too, to have roles to play. And I want more of a concern. I want more care given than policing when it's a mental health issue, and I want more care given when it's homelessness rather than a crime. And I think our police officers would. I won't speak for them. I'm the furthest thing from a police officer, but I would imagine they would love that too. I mean, I've heard all of this and I've learned so much, but it's pretty clear what we need to do to me.
This is off the topic, but Eric, where are we on our brown bag on OASIS, Judith Tackett, and immigrant populations? Where are we on that?
As far as I have, it's not a brown bag. It's going to be a next SMEs that we have up. Let me go to it real quick. We do have, it's still loading up, just 1 second. So for right now, I know for next week, we do have Ellen and Amanda Brack. We both have them confirmed for next Thursday.
Right.
For the Judith, for the one that I think you're talking about, Judith Tackett, she has been confirmed. We have not heard from Freedom, which I will check back on him. Sabina Mahudin has confirmed. Rashad said that he wouldn't, since Sabina is his sister, that he would do that. And I have reached out to a person from the trans community that I have talked to, but I've sent the invite and I have not heard back from them as of yet. And it might be one more person as well. One is a person of color, one is not. So both wanted to check on that. So that's where we are so far with them.
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone knew we were working on that. It's not just a word.
And that really is something that we need to tie up. We know that we started off saying we wanted to look at vulnerable communities and vulnerable populations, so we'll have more subject matter experts in that regard. But there's this concept that we need to see whether or not this will be part of the community policing model as a recommendation. We talked about someone at some point made the point of when you call 911, are the police the only option to go to a particular situation? Now, I'm just throwing this out because there could be some alternatives to that response mechanism, and whether we want to look at that, maybe that's outside of our scope, I don't know. And we also have these social services organizations, sort of in the mental health sphere, especially when the 911 operator hears that obviously someone's in a mental health crisis. Is there an option for them to send someone other than a police officer to that scene? Or can they send the police officer and this other alternative resource to that scene to make sure the situation is handled properly?
Sharon, I think that will come up next week in the conversation with Amanda Brock and Ellen Abbott both.
Can I jump in for 1 minute?
Sure.
So, talking about varied responses, I wanted to just throw one thing to the committee. A few years ago, we began a program. I was allowed to start a pilot program called the Public Safety Ambassadors. And the reason I got approval to implement that program is we were having difficulty staffing special events. So my thought was, if we could have these public safety ambassadors to help with crossing pedestrians and manning barricades and things like that, using our existing civilian employees on overtime status, we wouldn't have to pull so many officers when we staffed events. But as we discussed it further, our hope for the program was and still is to grow that someday. Because even before the events of the past year, where police reform came to the forefront, even before then, we're looking at the reality that we can't use sworn police officers for everything anymore. We're struggling with recruitment. The city is growing at an alarming rate, and we need to have alternatives to police. So my dream for the program is that someday we hire people, not just using our own civilians on overtime at events, but someday that we begin to hire some folks, part-time, full-time, or a mixture of both, to be public safety ambassadors, to do those things that you don't need a sworn police officer to do. That could be taking a report on a mailbox that was broken into. That could be taking a report on a shed that was broken into. That could be working a minor damage motor vehicle crash where the vehicles are already out of the roadway. That could be responding to a burglary when we know the suspects are already gone and we basically just need to report and to call somebody to take some prints and things of that nature. There's so many things we can use civilian employees for who are still a part of the police department. And I've seen that in action during the mask enforcement, because we began putting the public safety ambassadors down there. If any of you have seen them, they wear the khaki pants and the royal blue shirts. They're part of the police department, but they're not officers. And what we've seen down there is the public, number one, they're curious about who they are, but they're so willing to engage with it. Even folks who might not feel comfortable engaging with the police officer, they're talking to the public safety ambassadors, they're engaging with them. We've got them handing out masks, and I guarantee you, I can take a group of officers and have them hand out masks, and it's amazing. You'll get people that won't take the mask, or that don't feel comfortable taking it from an officer, or don't want to put on a mask because a police officer told them to. But the public safety ambassador walks up to the same person with the same mask, and they happily put it on. They have a nice conversation. They get directions to wherever they're going to go eat that night, and everybody's happy. So I hope that one day, part of the idea in the big picture, when I submitted this particular proposal, I hope that someday we can partner with colleges and universities and sell our PSA, our Public Safety Ambassador Program, to the criminal justice majors and say, hey, come work for us part-time or whatever you can do while you're in school as a public safety ambassador. Get to know the police department, become a part of our family, start working in the community, and after you finish college, come join the police department as an officer and go through the police academy. Or if you decide it's not your thing, continue working as a public safety ambassador. So I see a lot of possibilities for that program. And to your point, and to a point that we knew would come up during the Policing Policy Commission, we are at a point where we have to realize that we don't need sworn officers to do everything that we do. And programs like the Public Safety Ambassador Program moving forward will be a big part of that, along with partnering with our mental health professionals, our counselors, and all of those folks who are going to help us help the community, but not police the community in situations where policing isn't necessary, if that makes sense.
I'd like to piggyback off what the captain said. But however, instead of colleges, why not empower the community? Get people from the community, hire them. And also, that's the flaw I see in the community policing that's being offered right here on this committee is, yeah, they impactful with children and the elderly, but what about, you know what I'm saying, the 21-year-olds, you know what I'm saying, the 45-year-olds over in James Casey or J.C. Napier or Cumberland View, you know what I'm saying, over in them areas where they going to be just like down there on Broadway. When the police come to them, they ain't got nothing to say to them because most of them got some type of issue, whether they out here protesting or whatever the case may be. But yeah, they impactful with children and the elderly, but I didn't see not one gangbanger on the video that they showed or somebody, you know what I'm saying, middle age in the video. It was the elderly. So how are you going to connect with the others inside the community or get that shared help from the community that you have a bond that can bridge that gap?
And to your point, colleges, I didn't mean to imply that colleges was the only place we wanted to hire public safety ambassadors. Surely we would welcome anyone in the community to apply. But what we find is we lose a lot of good applicants to other states and other agencies. So that was just a way for us to get people into the fold, so to speak. But to your point, you're absolutely right. We welcome anyone in the community to apply and be a part of our engagement, be a part of the solution.
Captain, I'd like to thank you for your help tonight. Judge Calloway, I'd like to thank you. We've got to do some work now as a committee. So thank you so much for participating, both of you, this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And please reach out if I can be of any assistance or if you have any other questions. I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much.
Ditto. Good to see you, Captain.
Okay, now, Sharon, we can get down to business.
Okay. What we're looking at is getting some ideas because I'm going to, by the time we have the next meeting, formulate some draft recommendations. So we have to make this collaborative. And how, just throwing out the community policing, alternative responders, mental health crisis. We need some recommendations from this group on what we will do as far as this whole issue of community policing. We're looking at recommendations involving the school system, Judge, you can kind of go over our charge and our buckets that we have to make sure we respond to.
I'm happy to do that. The first issue we had was what experiences have Nashvillians had with police use of force? We really haven't discussed that yet, and I really hoped we would have someone to discuss that. I'm thinking when we talk with the homeless community, the OASIS representative, and other individuals, we're going to get some of that flavor that we need for that. How does the MNPD interact with people with mental illness? We got some of that brown bag, but I think we'll get a little bit more next week. We have Amanda Brock, we have Alan Abbott. That should tie that bow on that question. But here's the one we've got to answer from tonight. How does MNPD assist Metro Nashville Public Schools in providing safety in schools? That's the takeaway we've got to answer from tonight. So how does MNPD assist Metro Nashville Public Schools in providing safety in schools? Ask MNPS to report violent incidents in schools and on how principals, police, counselors, and others respond to incidents. Bob, you did a good job with that one. You asked that question straight up.
Yeah, what happens if you beat up a teacher?
Review school resource officer interactions with MNPS students and assess training and procedures. I think we did a good job of getting that answered. Ask MNPS to report on school experiences with violent interrupters, counseling, and other forms of social emotional support. I think we got some of that answered from Dr. and I'm sorry, I can't remember her.
Springer.
Identify opportunities and resource needs for police to build relationships and increase trust by interacting with students in mentoring or coaching capacities. I think they answered that. So from that, we need to answer, how does MNPD assist Metro Nashville Public Schools in providing safety in schools? But then what we need to look at is what needs to happen. The bigger question we had to answer was, what are they doing? How can we do it better? I think were the questions.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we do it better? Bob, I bet you've got a thought on that. Or Tom, I know you do.
Take it, Tom.
Tom, answer
There.
the question. I might see.
I had to unmute first. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm usually being told to be quiet by the judge, but so
Not tonight.
no, I think just hearing the math on the number of schools that we have is kind of disturbing about how few people we have to distribute amongst 150 schools. It seems like the mission and the dedication of that department with Captain Levitt is there. And we talked about it with a little bit. I think Eli mentioned that there may be some folks that may be dedicated, but maybe not all that effective, or maybe not even that dedicated. But a lot of this comes down to math. We just don't have the people. And so I think the best way we can do it is talk about resources and what's the best ratio for resource officers with schools based on school size and how they interact and how that changes the outcomes. If we could find some data on that, I think we can formulate a better position.
I think that's a question to ask David.
Probably is.
Or Dia, do you have that answer?
I do not have that answer. I did take it down though, and I want to take a minute here just to suggest to the committee that I think it's also important that as you develop your recommendations is to take a look at the department's annual goals and their what they refer to as their performance metrics. The department currently runs their plan and implementation based on key performance indicators that are typically established in an industry. That will tell you, for all of us who are planning geeks, that will definitely tell you where the priorities are. We measure, we do what we measure. And I think that gives a good context to your recommendations. So those documents are in the shared data folder. They're in the strategic document folder, and I'm sending them out right now to Madam Chair and Madam Vice Chair.
Is that the one sheet?
So there's a one-page sheet on the annual goals. But I will absolutely track down some SRO data in school if that's what the committee is interested in taking a look at.
There's one other thing I'd like to address on the community/neighborhood policing. The gentleman from Cambridge seemed to draw a great distinction between community and neighborhood policing. To me, it's the neighborhood policing has more structure and smaller units than community policing. But I think to us, we think it means the same thing, which is a better interaction. But I wonder there what we could gather from cities that are doing it and how it impacts the crime rate. And more specifically, one thing I'm interested in is how it impacts use of force over time. I wouldn't expect it to have a great impact in year one, but I would think it would have some impact over time and reduce crime and reduce use of force. And I think we can use those when we talk about not having sufficient resources to do those things. But when you tell people that you can reduce the crime rate by X and use of force by X, the cost might start to make sense. And I don't know if that information's already out there, Dia, or not. Maybe that's too technical, but.
So some of the data that we are pulling are, looking at ranking zip codes or precincts by use of force so that we have a better understanding of where the highest amount of use of force is, where it's lower. And then we can also take a look at it in terms of the example of West Precinct. Certainly West Precinct has some data on their model. That's a way to take a look at it. In terms of going beyond Metro Nashville, I definitely think we can see what is out there. There are several cities that are using dashboards, public dashboards, and who have strategic plans that direct very specific place-based objectives, which really gets at your question, Mr. Turner, which is how do you apply specific interventions so that they have outcomes in specific areas, right?
Mm-hmm. And maybe we have to phase it in, like what you said about use of force in certain zip codes, and maybe we look at it and say, well, if this is really effective, well, can we start in that precinct or that sector first?
Yeah. Indeed. I just want to notify Madam Chair and Madam Vice Chair that I must step off as there's another committee starting in a minute. But I trust our leadership of this committee to get me any additional data points or information that you may need.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
We haven't gotten to that use of force, but one thing that was, I remember I looked at, I forgot which video it was on the issue of community policing, and we were talking about how they learned to de-escalate, so it really never got to that point. Yet that I was hearing in an alternative, I guess it was in the another police officer had said that I think when they use, because deadly force ends up dovetailing this, and you end up with one of the situations that some communities find themselves in. And I don't know how this training works. That's another committee's charge to look at the training. But it seems to me that some of the community policing, if you spread that philosophy on de-escalation throughout the police force, as opposed to, I think they're trained, and then maybe, I'm not out there myself risking my life, so who am I to judge? But if you're trained to, if you are threatened, then use deadly force, then that seems to work, against, de-escalation. That works against de-escalation. It really does. So I don't know if we would try to think the themes and the foundation, the philosophy of community policing needs to be part of the entire culture, even though you aren't assigned as a community police officer. I think it would also help community policing officers specifically to be better accepted by the police officer, because almost as if you're a community police officer in the SRO, it's almost like you're a police officer light. You aren't a real police officer. You're a pseudo police officer. You're not part of the macho culture of policing. And I think people should really embrace that. I call it the softer side of policing, if that's going to be part of their charge, or else make it a separate whole thing. Make community police officers separate from regular altogether, rather than a separate unit under police officers. Maybe it should be something that you wouldn't even call a police officer to do. It's a separate entity. It's almost like, just a separate thing. Maybe they should be trained like police officers.
Sharon, I found the strategic goals for 2021. Was there a specific question other than the SRO on that document?
I think they were looking at some of the key factors they were measured on that fall within our charge. What are some of the things? Are they measured on use of force? Are they measured on, SRO performance? How are they measuring these things?
They're measured on full-time equivalent employees, property crimes, clearance rate of Part 1 crimes, clearance rate of violent crimes, Part 1 offenses, response time for all calls, response time for emergency calls, and secondary employment unit billable hours. Those are the only things that they have on their strategic goals. There's nothing else on their strategic goals.
So they're looking at the end game. If you can have a crime, get it taken care of to the satisfaction, I guess, of the victim, then you're good to go.
Right. It has nothing to do with community policing. It has nothing to do with MNPS. It has nothing to do with the care of the citizenry. All it has to do with is
resolving reported crimes.
Right. That's it.
More performance goals and strategic goals.
Correct.
I think that y'all are really onto something in terms of how do you set a target in such a way that is measurable and achievable, right? So in terms of this discussion, when Bob Haas was here, he talked about community policing, the philosophy going through the whole police force. So you don't have what Sharon said about police light, you have that whole philosophy. Combine that with the data that Dr. Verleer gave. Dr. Verleer from the Community Oversight Board said that police and MNPS respond to between 5 and 10% violent arrest issues. That means 90% of their work is the nonviolent kind. So in terms of how are we thinking we want to set up the police with this overarching community approach, I think Sharon's really onto something. If we can change kind of the view for how are you serving and protecting and working with and partnering the community, then you may have those radical results like we saw in the West Precinct, where you have 47% crime reduction. I think it has to be a part of what everybody does and what everybody sees.
Well, it's the mindset. And that goes back to the first person they arrested for a mask. it was a homeless man downtown. That's the mindset. We've got to change the mindset. That goes back to mental health. It goes back to community policing. It goes back to the SRO mindset that Tom was talking about. It's changing what their thought process is.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with that. But also, I mean, for example, and I just know what I read in the newspaper, and you know how dangerous that is. But if that's the only option a person faces, that doesn't, to me, sometimes the police officer may be, if that's the only option they know for that person, that's not necessarily the end of, I mean, that can happen. And so I think what we've got to think of, what are the options that those officers have, and what are the, what kind of training do they have? And I agree though that it's a mindset. We don't need the Chicago PD that show that we don't need that kind of mindset of tough guy policing all the time. And I think what we're charged to do is maybe help describe the kind of police officer that we'd like to see out there. I mean, that's part of it. We're also charged with describing the process or the system that would deliver services to those who are committing the crimes. And then we're also charged with just finding out. Well, I'll stop there because that's more than I can fathom the answer to already.
But see, that's part of what the specialty courts do in the court system.
Right.
The recovery court, which is the drug court and alcohol court, the mental health court, the veterans court, the cherished hearts, we're all the alternatives that try to put the warm fuzzy back in the court system once they've been arrested. Mm-hmm. There are alternatives to that, which is what Judge Calloway talks about.
Yeah, trying to keep them from coming into your courtroom.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's maybe when we look at the system, that may be the missing link.
Which would be fabulous.
Yeah, and I think, and to me again, and Larry keeps saying it, and I keep saying it, to me the missing link is all those nonprofits that want to help, but maybe don't know exactly how to fit into that, or there's not an efficient structure for engaging them.
I think in conjunction with this and that, maybe next week, Ellen Abbott with the state, and I think Amanda Brock are both going to give us additional ways to do that.
So can this be our work?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, can this be our work for the week then? And maybe I could go to dinner.
Because I do think that, with police officers through no fault of their own, is sort of the old adage, if only thing you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so it's kind of like that. They know how to do police, so everything they're called to do is going to be a policing type, old school arrest, detain manner. And so maybe if people who have a different arsenal or different tools they can use are there, we can go with a better result.
Well, and there is a committee looking at police training, right?
Yes.
And that model. So hopefully they're onto that as well.
Well, I think I have enough to get started based on this conversation. Hopefully I can get something out before next Thursday so we'll have something to talk about. And I am by no means an expert, but in the bucket of use of force, we'll kind of see where we are. Community policing, I'll wrap some language around that. The school system and vulnerable populations, we continue to have input from various experts on that. But I think we have enough to sort of get us started. But the reason, I hate to push you also, but the reason we're doing this is we're up against deadlines, and this is our reality and keeps us focused. So I really appreciate you all giving us a few extra minutes tonight.
And Sharon, if you could send us something, I love that they're seeing something in writing, because then I can sit there and stare at and think about it and make some notes and send those along. Then that's easier for me than just hearing it. Thank you for doing that.
I've got 2 halves of a sandwich. You want me to send you 1 half so we can, will that help you out?
I'm gonna you know what? I'm gonna click leave meeting right now as a result.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Tom, I sent you an email on your question. You were asking a question about retired police officers and firefighters. I sent you just an email. My children, they go to an MNPS school, and they have a community event day that has fire and police and EMT. And I also, as a middle school teacher, we've had a retired firefighter come in, and he's done science experiments. So I don't know how much of this is programmatic or if it's just people who have contacts, but there is avenues that exist already for what you were looking for.
To make that happen. I just think starting it at that age is and as a transition to when the kids get older, that, well, I remember when, Mr. Foster came in and talked about whatever, the volcano, and he was a retired policeman. Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know how much of that, again, is programmatic and how much of that is the school's relationship with somebody they know. But it's the one at the elementary school is a big deal. They got a helicopter in there and an ambulance, and they make it's like an exciting day.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, but I think you're onto something in terms of how can we create positive experiences for children in a context earlier on, because the negative experiences are going to come, and they need to be able to draw from the positive as well as
balance it out.
Yeah.
Good. All right.
Thanks.
Enjoy your sandwich.
Bye. Have a good one.
Bye. Thanks, Blake.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.org.